it's a point that I make repeatedly, why we have the convention of the year, comma, the name of the person, comma, year in the text, and at the end of the text we have all of the details, which include what? Name of author, year of publication, title of publication, where it was published, and who published it. That's not just to make your work extra towards the end of writing, but it's signaling immediately there's a political agenda going on. Who are you citing? Are all your citations of your supervisor? You know what? For example, there's a politics going on there. We can see it because there's a supervisor and 6 of his references are in your reference list. Okay? So what's going on here? We see a politics in the bibliography. We see a politics also in terms of the years. Okay, you're stuck in the year 2010. What has happened since 2010 about this particular phenomenon? So the first thing that I read when I'm examining a doctoral thesis is the reference list, because I want to see who you're writing against, who you're writing to, who you're dialoguing with. So the reference list, I'm currently teaching a writing course at the moment. I'm saying the most important thing I want to read first when I get an article is who have you read? What have you read about this particular topic? Whose shoulders are you standing on as you're engaging with this particular kind of study? The politics of place with respect to, is this all from New York, USA, California, Chicago, all of the studies. So I want to look at your reference list, and I could do an analysis of your department by taking all the PhD theses for the last 5 years and do an analysis of the politics of the bibliography. So I'll see MacArthur's name repeatedly in the literature. So I know, okay, there's something going on here. Okay? In the nature of the literature. So what is going on as you start to engage with this particular process of the politics of the bibliography? 2 more minutes and I think I'm done. Anything below 2000 as a PhD, you're out of date. Please know, you should also be talking about the politics of the literature. You talk about journal writing, not necessarily textbooks. Because the most recent literature and new knowledge at the cutting edge where you're becoming a knowledge producer and a philosopher is in journal writing. Okay, type of literature. You can't be citing Wikipedia repeatedly. Or Fair Lady, or I don't know, You Magazine, as your source of literature, because therein lies a whole set of issues. Which is the knowledge community you're writing against? So here's my rule of thumb, and see where you are in this. If you're at the stage of still writing your proposal, you should have at least 20 references, at least 20 references in your proposal at this stage. By the time you come to defend your proposal, it should be up to 100 that you should have read. By the time you actually present your thesis for examination, if it's anything less than 200, it's not good enough. So this is why we say you read for a PhD. Okay? All right, I think that's a nice time for you to go and have a break. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll have 10 minutes, folks, and then we'll be back to pick up.
Thinking here is that the literature review is not about padding, and I think there's a lot of padding that goes on, that it looks impressive but says nothing. Okay? And I think that's the problem about it. We also talked about the issue about you using scholarly books and journals as being important rather than fashionable resources. It's a synthesis that's critical. I think that's the point I've made already. And then it's not just about recording what is, you're recording your critique of the sources of the literature, whether you agree or don't agree. Okay, and then I've also made the point about gaps. So in a sense, what we're saying here is that that the issue is to mind the gap all the time. What is the literature not saying is as important as what it is saying. Okay? Noting trends, and I think I've made that point already, of logical flow. Make sure that because we're talking about examining a thesis, that we can be able to see that it is fully cited. So if it's not fully cited, we can't locate it. Is this an idea coming from the 50s or the 2010s? Where's it coming from? So it needs full citation. And supervisors, you shouldn't accept lazy presentations where people cite names of people without the full citation. I do it, I say, I'm not reading this, I'll put a line through it, just as a way of provoking the student to say, I don't know, because I can't go and look it up or check it up or locate it in its context. Okay. I don't know what convention you use. We use APS 6th now, not APS 5th, as the referencing technique. Those of you who use EndNote, you know how to organize these things to be able to follow the conventions, and you need to know those conventions because in different articles, journals, these conventions change. Harvard referencing, APS referencing, etc. Always make sure that you are able to point to what your literature has not said. And over coffee we were talking about this. Is remember, the literature review doesn't end at the end of your literature review chapter. You'll come back to it because your thesis is generated from what new comes from the field, which challenges the existing literature. So you'll come back to the notion of literature. So you'll have to ask me to come back to do a workshop on analyzing literature, or analyzing fieldwork, or analyzing data and theory building. Okay? I think that I've mentioned all of those points, but I want to argue this particular point. Note that a theoretical framework, and you can see how I've slipped between the two of saying, what is it that the dominant theories out there are saying, or the dominant theorists are saying? That's the theories about the phenomenon, which are the theoretical framework, as opposed to the literature review is what has been researched about that phenomenon. That means people have taken a theory and gone into field to be able to understand that theory in practice. Okay? And they've done some review of the literature. Now, you can see for some people, those two things can easily be brought together. What theories are used and how are they engaging with the field can be brought together. In some disciplines, they make quite clear a separation. Keep those two things separate. Tell us what are the philosophical aspects and then the operational aspects in the literature review. I'm not too sure where management studies positions themselves with respect to that as a discipline, but there are conventions, and conventions are there, and you need to be asking what those conventions are and do they serve the purpose that you want to achieve. In my own study, I did a evolving chronology of the change of the concept of what it means to be a teacher over different periods of time. So you can see I married both theory, history, and the review of the literature into one chapter. By the way, you will be pleased to note that mine is not a written text, but a text you listen to. So the form doesn't need to actually be a piece of writing. Okay, but that's another debate altogether about representing how your ideas of thinking. Because representation does not necessarily only have to be in the form of a written argument. I suppose management people might think I'm definitely crazy now, all right? Okay? But if you think about it, we did start a whole argument as we began using a poem. And it's another representational form. It's a written form, but represented in a different form. And you could use pictures, you could draw, you could have dance performance, you could have visuals, etc. But we won't go there now. For the time being, think of a literature review as a written document. Okay? So both are understanding the phenomenon, and that's the key point that you need to be clear about. Do you know what's going under the microscope in your study? And that's what I call the fridge phenomenon. That's what goes on your fridge with the critical questions of your study. That's the phenomenon. So that you keep reminding yourself every time you go back to the fridge, and that's why most people put on weight during the course of their PhDs, all right? Because they find excuses to go back to the fridge. So I said, put on the fridge the issue of what's my phenomenon, because you can easily get sidetracked onto all sorts of nice roads to go down, where your phenomenon is not about that, it's about this. And so that you keep reminding yourself what's the phenomenon and what's the focus that you're going to be using in your study. Okay? I'm arguing a case for it requires skillful argumentation, a clear architecture, speaking backwards and forwards to the phenomenon. It's more difficult to do it, to combine it, but if you know what you're doing, it's easier. And that's why I always say to students, when you're writing a chapter or chapters, spend more time on the orientation to the writing, so you provide what Bruner calls an advance organizer. You're telling the reader, this is what you're going to be reading, and this is why you're going to be reading it, and it's organized in the following way. Short paragraph, but it does wonders to structure your thinking as an orientation. I also suggest at the end of the chapter to have a synthesis. I have argued the following in this particular chapter, which advance these following key points. I will now move in the next chapter to the fieldwork that was proceeded. You see, they're simple statements, but they're creating road marks on the journey, or signposts for the journey, so that a person reading your literature or reading any part of your thesis knows why they're reading what they're reading. Nothing is more irritating as a supervisor, and supervisors present will tell you, that they're reading pages and pages of I don't know what. I don't know why I'm reading this particular detail. Are you trying to impress me that you went to the library? You see what I'm trying to get at? Or are you impressing me with the architecture of your argument? Note how often I said that. Okay? The word, the architecture of your argument. Do we know the roadmap? Do we know where you're going in this particular organizing of the telling of your study? Okay, I'm going to end the presentation with just a very interesting, another exercise. And this exercise I'm going to be drawing from the tradition of film and the way in which we think about films. All right? And it's a wonderful article, and if you take nothing else down as a reference, take down that reference from educational research, that particular article of trying to see how we go about choosing to represent our references. So we're now into the issue of organizing, the point of how you organize the references. And so this particular study, I'll tell you how it's conducted. I see that the people are now using the new technologies of taking snapshots of the slides rather than writing. Interesting how new technologies are being used as forms of learning. Okay? Okay, so educational research is an interesting journal because it's talking about learning to become a researcher. Because it's a process of learning that you're engaging with. And in this particular journal article, This is what this particular study is about. There is an author, person X, or we'll call her A, person A, who wrote a particular paper, right? She wrote a paper that's quite seminal, meaning it's a key debate in the argument about the value of, in this case it happens to be the value of reflective practice. Now, if some of you might know, in education we often talk about how do you make sense of yourself and your actions as a teacher? Reflective practice. So this cited author is person A, who wrote a paper that has become quite famous as a particular paper, what we call a seminal work, leading to many new ideas around it. Subsequent to that, several journal articles that were written after that, after the fact, or several theses that were written, were all making references, and we're going to call that group of people B. Okay? Those people are choosing to link to A via the paper, making sense of what is the paper that the person is actually writing. So they're commenting on, and in doing so, this author who writes, Hughes, who wrote the article, is writing an article to say that there's a difference between the way in which person A is cited in all the different articles in B. That there are different ways in which they regard A. You with me in the argument? Yes. All right? So they say, how do they understand A? Is A cameo role? And we're using now a metaphor from films. Do you know what a cameo role is? Person who's there in the plot, small appearance. You don't see them very often on the stage of the play. You don't see them, but they're there. And usually sometimes cameo roles are given to some very good-looking people or famous people. Okay? Because it's a draw card. It pulls you into focusing, oh, I'm going to see that film because person X is starring in it, who's cuddly or sweet or handsome or sexy or whatever. And she draws in, you're going to see Halle Berry, not the film itself. But she really doesn't play an important part. She's a cameo role. Cameo is those little buttons, brooches, that women wore with a relief of a person. It's not a three-dimensional picture, it's a flat two-dimensional picture that you wore as a cameo. Some of you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, at least I know somebody knows what a cameo is. All right? So a cameo role means it's a flat, single, two-dimensional representation. Not the whole dress is about the cameo, it's just an adornment added on to the apparel of the dress. Okay? So there's one way in which you might cite an author is in a cameo role. And we'll unpack what that actually means in each of those. There's another way in which you can use author A, is that person is in a supporting role. Now, some of you might know the story of Macbeth, studied it at school. So there's a main character who's the star, and the whole plot revolves around that character. But there's somebody who's constantly in the space where you see the interaction between the main character and the supporting character. Of course, you've all watched the Oscar Awards, haven't you? Where you get Best Supporting Actress, that's what we mean. She's not the main actress or the main focus of the study of what is going on in the film, but she's there to support the main plot. So another way in which we could be engaging with writing and representing our literature is to see the person as a supporting role. The way in which you're using A is in a supporting role function. to support what? The plot of your narrative, the plot of your literature. You're using them as a means to assist you, not the main argument, but maybe it's a counter argument. Or it's not the male version, it's the female version of the same thing. You with me in the supporting role? The supporting role function. Or this person is central to the whole argument of your text. So that person is the star. A is the star. Everything is going to revolve around what A had to say. Now, A could be a person or a theory. You with me? A could be an author or a study that was done by an author. And B is engaging with constructing a relationship with A. What you're trying to do in the literature is construct a relationship with A. So, 3 possible options are available. None of them are good or bad. They all serve different functions. So, you need to ask yourself, when you're citing somebody in your literature review, are you citing them as a cameo role? Just there to add decoration to the study? Creating some addition feature to the study, but not central to it? Or are you supporting something else, a supporting role? Or are you supporting them, are you quoting them with respect to them being seminal or a star, or key feature or key theory? Now, I want to ask you, some of you may have seen this movie. Have you? Or if your children didn't drag you to it, you should drag yourself to see it. Know the film? You know the book, no doubt. You probably read it as a child, hopefully. If you haven't, it's time you did. Okay? All right. Talk to the person next to you. Who's the star? Who's the cameo role? And who's the supporting role in this film? By the way, this is the poster for the film. Okay, who has read Alice in Wonderland? You can close your eyes, I'll only look. Who has read Alice in Wonderland? Or knows what Alice in Wonderland is? Okay, tell us what Alice in Wonderland is. What do you know about it? Whatever it is that you know. Yeah?
This is a trick question. There's Alice, and there's the Queen. I can't remember what else.
Yes, okay.
That's all.
All right, and who's Alice?
She's a little girl.
A little girl, and what happens to her? Come, some of you know the story. Let's piece it together, little bits that you know. Management people don't read creative literature. You see the problem? We're reading the wrong literature. Okay?
I haven't read the book. I think she falls into a pit and then she gets into a imaginative world where she's
yes, something.
adventures and all that.
I'm sure you have children.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now you're going to buy them the book Alice in Wonderland to be able to read the story to them, because it's a fascinating book just to read. Okay? Or if you're bored, go and watch the movie. It's a 3-dimensional movie as well. Okay? This particular movie. So Alice is walking in the field and she sees a rabbit and she runs after the rabbit, who seems to be rushing along, and then she follows the rabbit, and she falls down a big hole. When she falls down into a big hole, she lands up into an imaginary world where she doesn't know whether the imaginary world is her own world or it's the world that she's entered. Okay? Because things start to take on all different shapes and forms. So, for example, there is a rabbit who's running around all the time saying, I'm so late, I'm late, I'm late for a very important date. Okay? And there's a rabbit running around in this particular environment. And then as she goes through different experiences, the environment changes where the scale of things change. At some times things are extremely large, or at times extremely small. She also enters into, yes, the point, she enters into a world where she meets very different people. There's a red queen and there's a white queen. And they both have completely different styles of managing a kingdom. Aha, can you see why you should be reading Alice in Wonderland? Okay? Because you never know which literature is valuable or useful for you when you're doing a literature study or literature review. It does not need to only come from inside a scholarly book per se. Okay, so the Red Queen, you know who she is? Actress. Which one's the Red Queen, you think? Ah, there's a good question. Which one's the Red Queen? And what's her name? Helen Bonham Carter. Okay, so she's the Red Queen. And then on the right-hand side you have Anne Hathaway. You see, some men know who this is. Okay, right? Anne Hathaway is the White Queen. Completely different world, and Alice is entering into her world, and its world of logic is completely different. And therefore, concepts of time, space, etc. change in each of those different worlds. But there is a person, by the way, the bad diagram there, I can't, if we could darken it, you'd see Alice there. I'm sorry, I don't want to fiddle with the lights just now. But can you see Alice? Yes. Where is she? Yeah, in this particular. Okay, there's Alice. And what's happened is these are all the flowers that suddenly have become much larger. Okay. Well, what has this got to do with literature review? Talk to the person next to you. What's this got to do with literature review? Yes, okay, now I'm going to ask, who's born in December? You won't? Yes, tell us what's got to do with literature review. Put your mic on, please.
That picture, if I look at that picture, the flowers are huge, it's large, and I think it's unknown, some of it. And I think you can fall into that pit with literature review as well.
Mm-hmm. It's a pity the issue is not, the picture is not as clear as I intended. Can you see here? What can you see in the picture? That the flowers actually have personalities. They have people, they are almost animated. They actually have presence. Would you like to extend this in any way? If that was additional information I gave you?